Christmas is a time of year loved by all children. The decorations around the house, the Christmas tree with presents at its base, the excitement of falling asleep on Christmas Eve, knowing that when you wake, you can open all your presents and play with all the new toys. Unfortunately, in 1945, Christmas Eve would be filled with fear, grief, and heartache for one family from West Virginia. In Fayetteville, a fire broke out in the house belonging to George and Jennie Sodder and their 10 children. While there is a great deal of mystery surrounding this tragedy, there are a few things that we know for certain. 9 of the children were at home during the fire. The eldest son was away in the army. Jennie was awoken on 3 separate occasions during the night. At 12:30, she received a phone call. On the other end of the line, she could hear a man's voice along with clinking glasses in the background. A woman spoke up asking for someone. Jennie said,
"You have the wrong number,"
and hung up. As she was making her way back to bed, she noticed the lights downstairs were turned on and the front door was unlocked with the curtains open. Marion was asleep on the couch and she assumed the other children were asleep in their beds. She turned off the lights, closed the curtains and locked the door. After returning to bed, she was awoken by a loud bang and a rolling noise on the roof. She drifted back to sleep, only to be woken an hour later to find the house engulfed by smoke. George and Jennie ran for their lives. They managed to escape the burning inferno along with their toddler Sylvia and teenagers Marion and George Jr. and 23-year-old John. 5 of the 9 children that were there on that fateful night was still unaccounted for. George assumed that they must be trapped inside the house, somewhere on the top floor. He broke a window and climbed back inside the house, unable to see through the thick smoke and flames. Exiting the house, he decided to grab his ladder to reach the upstairs floor, but his ladder was missing. There had to be another option for George to reach the top floor of his house and rescue his 5 trapped children. He raced over to move his truck alongside the house and climb on that to get in. Trucks that had been working perfectly the day before were now suddenly broken. Marion ran to a neighbour's house to call the fire department. However, there was no answer from the operator. The neighbour drove into town to talk directly to Fire Chief F.J. Morris, who began a phone tree where he would phone one firefighter, who would phone another, who would phone another, so on and so forth. Despite being a mere 2.5 miles away from the Sodder house, fire crews didn't arrive until 8 a.m, a full 7 hours after the fire began. After an investigation, it was determined that faulty wiring had caused the blaze that had obviously taken the lives of 5 children on Christmas Eve. There were a series of curious events that had led up to that fateful night. Only when thinking back on them did they all seem to finally make some form of sense. A few months before Christmas, someone arrived at the house asking about hauling work. He made his way to the back of the house with George and pointed out 2 fuse boxes, claiming,
"This is going to cause a fire someday."
George had recently had them checked by the local power company, who had said they were both working perfectly fine. At around the same time, another man had tried selling the Sodders life insurance, becoming quite annoyed when George had declined.
"Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini."
George had in fact been quite outspoken about his thoughts on the Italian dictator. The older Sodder sons had noticed a strange man parked along Highway 21, watching the younger children coming home from school. One would expect to find the remains of the missing children in the rubble of the fire. However, no bones were discovered. Jennie began her own investigation, burning a number of different animal bones to see if a fire could completely dissolve them. After each experiment, she was left with a pile of charred bones. Why were there no bones left within the house after the fire? Curious things continued to happen after the fire. A telephone repairman told them that the lines had appeared to have been cut rather than burned. If the fire had indeed been an electrical fault, the power to the house would have been dead. So how were the downstairs lights all turned on during the night? A witness to the fire came forward claiming to have seen a man that night taking a block and tackle used for removing car engines. Was this man responsible for George's trucks not being able to start? When the family returned to their burned house, Sylvia found a hard rubber object in the yard, possibly the source of the loud bang Jennie had heard that night. George inspected it and claimed it was a napalm pineapple bomb, typically only used during warfare. Things were starting to add up that this was not some simple electrical fault, but something far more malicious. The question still remained: where were the 5 missing children? In the days to come, multiple reported sightings of the children came through. One woman claimed to have seen the children staring out of a car at the same time the fire was raging. Another said she saw them at a tourist stop between Fayetteville and Charleston, some 50 miles west of the Sodder house, the day after the fire. She told police,
I served them breakfast. There was a car with Florida license plates at the tourist court too.
A woman at a Charleston hotel had seen 4 of the 5 children check in with 2 men and 2 women alongside them.
The children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction. I do not remember the exact date. However, the entire party did register at the hotel and stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered about midnight. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. One of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. I sensed that I was being frozen out, and so I said nothing more. They left early the next morning.
With no help coming from the police, the Sodders turned to C.C. Tinsley, a private investigator. He found that the insurance salesman was a member of the coroner's jury that had deemed the fire to have been accidental, and Fire Chief F.J. Morris, who had claimed no remains were found, supposedly discovered a heart in the ashes, hiding it inside a dynamite box and burying it at the scene. Tinsley and Morris dug up the box and had it inspected by the local funeral director, who concluded it was beef liver and not heart, and was completely untouched by the fire. Rumours spread that Morris had buried the liver in the rubble in hopes of finding remains of any kind would convince the family to stop their investigation. Over the years, George and Jennie would continue their investigations, eventually putting up a large billboard with the 5 children displayed along with a reward of $5,000, which was soon increased to $10,000. Which is around $124,000 in today's money. A few tips came in when the reward was posted, but every time George went to follow up on the new lead, he would return empty-handed. In 1968, more than 20 years after the disappearance of the 5 children, Jennie found a letter addressed to her in the letterbox. The letter had come from Kentucky, but had no return address on it. Inside was a photo of a man in his mid-20s. He had a striking resemblance to the then 9-year-old Lewis. On the back was a cryptic, handwritten note which read, Lewis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Ill boys. A90132 or 35. George and Jennie hired another private detective to travel to Kentucky to follow up on this rather promising lead. Just as with all their other leads, nothing came from this, and no other letters were sent. Still searching for his children, George passed away in 1968, never knowing what happened on that fateful night. Jennie built a fence around her property and began adding rooms to her home, constantly separating herself further from the outside world. She had only ever worn black clothing since the fire, a sign of constant mourning over her missing children. She too would pass away without knowing what happened to her children, taking her final breath in 1989. The billboard was brought down and the world moved on, leaving the Sodder children behind. Jennie's remaining children and grandchildren, however, continued the investigation and came up with their own theories on what happened that night.
The mafia had tried to recruit George, and he declined.
They tried extorting money from him and he refused.
The children were kidnapped by someone they knew.
Someone entered the house through the unlocked door and told them about the fire, offering to take them to safety.
Many theories have come and gone, never leading to concrete evidence on what happened to the Sodder children. The youngest, Sylvia, doesn't believe her siblings lost their lives during the fire. Although only being 2 years old at the time, she had some vague memories of that night back in 1945. Her father bleeding after smashing a window to find his children, the screams echoing through the quiet streets. Sylvia would often browse the internet and engage with people interested in her story, trying to find anything that might lead to that one breakthrough. Sadly, Sylvia passed away in 2021, just like her parents and siblings, never knowing what happened to Maurice, Martha, Lewis, Jennie, and Betty.